Are we now sharing?
Yes, you are.
All right. Sorry about that, everyone. Um, the U.S. manufacturing's in a golden age. We're manufacturing more today than we ever manufactured in the past. But at the same time, there's fewer jobs. In the 1950s, 51% of the workforce was employed in manufacturing. Today, it's 8%, and it's shrinking. That's not a negative, that's a positive. And because I think there's an analogy you can look at. If we look at and go back to 1850, the US population was 23 million people at that time, and half of Americans worked on the farms. It was agriculture. Today it's less than 1%, and they're producing 1,000 times as much. The majority of millionaires in the 1850s, the large majority lived along the Mississippi River on plantations. 85% of our exports were cotton or agricultural products. And in the 1850s or the early 1800s, there was a UK economist by the name of Thomas Malthus. Malthus stated that he believed we'd reached the peak of food production and food production couldn't increase anymore. As population increased, it was negative for food because there wasn't going to be enough food to go around. That meant that food prices would increase and inflation would take off because we had a limited food production. Malthus recommended celibacy. He recommended getting married later in life. He thought famines were good. He thought epidemics were good. He thought wars to limit the population were good. He argued that when the population grew faster than the food supply, wages would go down. Um, that was Malthus in 1850. Half the people lived on the farms. Today, Malthus could have never imagined tractors and combines and milking machines and a host of other productivity things. Instead of reducing food output and agricultural output, what happened is jobs were lost on the farm, the number of people employed went down, but production went up because of productivity. Productivity, reducing the number of jobs was a positive in farming, not a negative. It turned out to be a very big positive. And not only did it turn out to be a very big positive, but it moved the United States from an agricultural nation into an industrial nation. Today, if you look at what's happening, manufacturing is following the same path. We had 13 million manufacturing jobs in 1950, 12 million today, but we're producing 15 times the output today that we produced in the 1950s. You know, similar to what we saw in agriculture. For me personally, I began my career. I graduated from Oregon State with a degree in math. I went to Carnegie Mellon for my MBA, and then I came out to Intalco Aluminum Corporation up in Ferndale, Washington, second largest smelter in the world, with a number of individual plants supplying it. Started as a management trainee. I ended up as plant superintendent for the carbon plant. And during that period of time, it was a French technology. Aluminum was was invented essentially by Hall, who started Alcoa, and by Héroult in France, who started Péchiney Aluminum. And the smelter in Ferndale was built on the French technology. And the French were a different approach than American manufacturing. The French or the Americans, you start as a worker, you become a foreman, a general foreman, and work your way up to a superintendent. The French people, the education system is different, and no time to explain it, maybe at a different workshop, but they actually moved their most intelligent people into the work, into the production, and back and forth into research. And I was one of those. I came from Carnegie Mellon. They thought it was a great school. So they hired me, started as a management trainee, worked in the production side for a while, then was sent to France for a year and a half, where I worked with a number of really brilliant young people, came back to Intalco as superintendent of the carbon plant and had some ideas on how to change manufacturing and what was doing. At that time, the average consumption of carbon in producing aluminum was around 480 pounds of carbon to 1,000 pounds of aluminum. The Intalco plant, was using about 482 when I took over as superintendent. The best anyone had been able to achieve was 444. That was what people considered the very maximum that could be done. Most American plants at Alcoa and Reynolds, and those plants were running over 500 pounds per thousand. I came back with, and maybe it was crazy, but I was just 30 years old, thought that we should change the process, very make significant changes in the process. It was a big risk at that time, but by the end of the period of time I was there, within a few years, our consumption had dropped from 480 pounds of carbon to 1,000 to 421, and then the following year, 416. But in order to justify that, not only did I want to reduce the consumption, but I also reduced the workforce, figured out how to reduce the workforce by 30%. We gained productivity, we reduced the workforce, we increased the quality, and we increased the throughput and gave a better quality product. That's what manufacturing is about. That was my experience then. That's what it is now. And when you do that, productivity allows wages to increase without causing inflation. That's why people focus on productivity, why they talk about productivity. They look at the average number of hours worked and the amount of throughput that goes through there. I remember going through the Communications Museum in Seattle, Museum of Cellular Communications, going back to the phone time. And I saw an advertisement going back to the 1910 time period. The advertisement was for personnel. They were advertising for women telephone operators to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, with a pay of 25 cents a day. Not 25 cents an hour, but 25 cents a day. You know, no longer do we have telephone operators, and not many, but the wages and salaries are a lot higher than 25 cents a day, and people are not working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You know, I'm pretty old. I go back to a time when in the late 1940s, early 50s, my family had a phone. It had a 3-digit number. But beyond that, when I was a child in early grade school, when I wanted to call somebody, I would pick up the phone and say to the operator, I want to call Chris Brody. And she would connect me. The operator had a cord that was to my phone and a cord to Chris's phone, and she would plug it in and I would connect. I didn't have to talk about the number. All I did is say, I wanted to call the kids down the street. And the operator knew. The operator plugged it in. Didn't need the numbers. That began to go away with automation. And soon it wasn't telephone operators that were connecting you. It was machines, big machines. And you can go through Communications Museum and see how those worked and why they dinged as they did. And instead of 3 numbers, it became 7 numbers. And in the early days, it was not 7 numbers, but there were exchanges. My phone number growing up, as I was in high school, was Evergreen 2 0861. That's the number you had to plug in. And the next change, everybody had that exchange, seven digits, but two of those digits were letters, not number. The next change came, of course, introducing numbers. So you had seven numbers. And then the next change was an area code, 10 numbers. And now the change is even more because you have country codes. Each one of those was a productivity improvement. When I got into this business 40 years ago, to make a phone call from Seattle to Bellevue was a cost of 10 cents a minute. To make a call over to from Seattle to Chicago or Seattle to Florida was 40 or 50 cents or $1 a minute. Today you make those calls and there's no extra charge. That's all because of gains of productivity, gains in the equipment, gains in what's going on. You know, that's productivity, and it allows fewer people to do the work, but wages to increase. That's the impact, productivity. And what we're seeing in manufacturing is further increases. We're seeing smart factories now, talking about using AI and machine learning and real-time data to optimize the processes. Using those processes, we're reaching the point of leading to dark factories. It's not far from the automated factory imagined by Warren Bennis. He said that factory will have two employees, a man and a dog. The man will be there in the factory to feed the dog, and the dog will be there to make sure the man never touches any of the equipment. Now, that's not exactly how it's going to work because things do break down and you need maintenance and you need to replace things. But dark factories are running today. They're running and they're called dark factories because they have no human employees. Those factories run even during the night without ever turning on the lights. And that's where smart investing is going. Think about where we were in the steelmaking industry. Back in the 1950s, we dominated steelmaking in the world. 50% of all steelmaking was in the US. We had US Steel, Bethlehem Steel, Allegheny Steel. You just go down the list of steel companies, they were US steel companies. But something has given way. That was in the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s. I can remember I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and I can remember one of the most fantastic sights I ever saw. There's a tram that you can go up Mount Washington and overlook the city as Pittsburgh. And during that time, J&L Steel along the river, I can't remember if it was the Monongahela or the Allegheny River, but one of the two rivers, I think the Monongahela. Looking down, you had the blast furnaces blowing plumes of fire 100 or 150 feet, 200 feet into the air. Flames that changed colors and danced and did all those things. It was a beautiful sight to see. All those are gone now. All those are gone. J&L Steel is gone. US Steel, they never kept up with the technology. The technology has been replaced. And last year, US Steel, our number one steel manufacturing company in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, US Steel was sold to Nippon Steel because they were inefficient. They didn't stay up with the productivity. That's where we're going. That's what's happening. We're looking at robots that now hand complex, irregular tasks. It's beyond repetitive work. We're talking about forklifts that operate without an operator. We're talking about equipment that does complex work, way beyond the repetitive work. And that's replacing humans. Robots are never absent. They're never late for work. They don't need coffee breaks. They don't need lunch breaks. They just can work and produce what they're supposed to produce. And they do it exactly the same way 100% of the time. And that may eliminate jobs, but the fact is, it increases productivity and the people that are left are getting paid more. That's manufacturing. And we're there. We're doing that. And AI is going to take another boost and make it even greater. But if we're talking about manufacturing, and we're going to get to talking about where to invest in manufacturing, but before we get to that point, we have to talk about where we stand, because we have to talk about China. They control 28% of global manufacturing. The US, 17%. And when we talk about China, we have to talk about the most recent happenings in China, because China in 2017 did their Made in China 2025, in which they wanted to dominate sectors like computers, electronic vehicles, robotics, tablets. They wanted to dominate manufacturing. They wanted to replace the United States as the dominant force. They are producing more manufacturing than we do. But much of the manufacturing they're doing has been in simple products, easy to produce. Now, that's not so true anymore. They've moved beyond that. Ford's CEO visited China, said it's the most humbling thing I've ever seen. Their cost and quality is far superior to what we produce in the US. You know, I had a client 30 some years ago who was the who was in charge of building an American Standard plant in Tianjin, China. And that plant was going to employ 1,000 people. The plant was going to produce ceramic toilets, ceramic bathtubs, and ceramic shower stalls. Pretty straightforward, not complicated, pretty straightforward. But of those 1,000 employees, not one of the 1,000 had ever used a ceramic toilet. Not one of those 1,000 employees had ever used a ceramic bathtub. Not one had ever used a ceramic shower stall. Not one of those employees had ever been introduced to ceramic toilets, bathtubs, or shower stalls. Today, those employees who used to grow some of their own food, used to sew some of their own clothing, used to do a lot of things, living at a subsistence level. Those employees now have smartphones. They drive cars, not bicycles. And they do have bicycles, but they now have cars. They live in condos. They buy their clothes at department stores. They buy their food at grocery stores. And they've moved into the middle class. But in the beginning, 30 some years ago, none of them had even seen that. Wages, at the same time, their wages are rising. When they started 30 years ago, the wages were dirt cheap. Not anymore. The wages have increased and allowing them to move into the middle class. Their productivity in China is increasing too. If you look at what's going on, there were several venture capitalists who also went to China in a group and saw what happens and what is happening in China in electric vehicles, batteries, solar, wind turbines, drones, and advanced robotics. And what they had to say was truly, what am I trying to say? Truly shocking. I have a quote. It's the most humbling thing I've ever seen. That was the Ford. But the other executives described dark factories where robots do much of the work alone, so there's no need to even leave the lights on for humans. We visited, according to Greg Jackson, the boss of British energy supplier Octopus, and he stated that we visited a dark factory producing some astronomical number of mobile phones and not one human being in the factory. You know, um, far from being focused on low quality products, China since 2017 has now moved into rapidly growing high value technologies like the electric vehicles, like the batteries, like robotics. And seeing the gap firsthand, these VCs said they don't even see how American competitors can survive. That's according to Taya Raphael, a former investment banker from at both Goldman Sachs and Barclays. And he said that the competition with China and other countries is going to be truly difficult. Winning that battle is going to be extremely difficult. And yet I have a different take on it. For all that, I think that China's plan is all central planning. And American firms have a couple advantages that China doesn't have. China's central planning. I had the experience when I worked for the French technology company, Patinet, aluminum producer. I had the opportunity to go to Romania to visit the plant in Romania. One of the people that I knew, a Frenchman, was advising the technical plant manager. And so I had the opportunity to go and visit that plant in Romania, and I met the plant manager. That was an experience that I have never forgotten, and I want to share with you. Because in producing aluminum, you're producing it in very large furnaces. You have you're passing a very large electrical current from an anode to a cathode. You're passing it through a liquid cryolite bath, and in that furnace, you're keeping an inventory of molten aluminum. The furnaces operate at 1757 degrees, plus or minus 2 degrees. If you get below that, you begin to freeze up. If you get too hot, you begin to melt the anodes and destroy the anodes. And you begin to throw metal out of the furnaces, and you do a lot of things that are not very good. The efficiency goes to zero. And in his case, when he was the superintendent of the furnace line, the furnaces began to overheat. And one day he's at home with his wife, and there's a knock on the door. It's the police. They say, "Come with us." They take him down, they put him in a car, they drive him to a prison. They at the prison, they take his clothes, give him prison clothes. Nobody says anything as to what's happening. They don't say anything to his wife. They don't say anything to him. He's in prison for 18 months. Nobody ever tells him, "Why are you there?" Nobody ever says anything. One day, they say, "Come with us." The prison officials say, "Come with us." They take his prison clothes, they give him back his regular clothes, they put him in a car, the police drive him back to his apartment, let him out. He goes back to his apartment during that whole time, 18 months. No one ever said a word about why he was gone, but he knew. When the furnaces began to overheat, what he did is you can cool the furnaces to some degree by increasing the amount of molten aluminum in the furnace. And that's what he did. That was a correct direction in which to go, but it was too little, too late. The over all the aluminum smelters in the communist countries, the Soviet Union, you have a works manager. The works manager decided what was going on was sabotage. He sent in people, and at each furnace, you have a blackboard and you write down all the actions you're taking. So when they increased the amount of metal in the furnace, that was written down on the blackboard. You have the works manager sent around people in white shirts and thin black ties to take down all the information. They decided it was sabotage. Of course, it wasn't sabotage. Of course, my French friend was the person that went and said what they need to do to correct the problem and did the correction. So that's central planning. That's central planning. If that happens in the United States, and it does happen in aluminum furnaces, it does happen that you begin to overheat or cool, you take an action and you get rid of it. It's a mistake that's made. There's some reasons it happened, but that left an impression. The plant manager knew exactly why he was in prison. He was in prison because he made a decision. So what you find in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, is people fleeing from making a decision. I also had a company once that was involved in and became involved in converting a former Soviet military plant to commercial aviation, largest employer in the country of Georgia. In Tbilisi, Georgia, produced all the fighter jets, the 920, the Su-25 fighter jets, like the A-10 Warthog. Those fighter jets, they produced 925 of those fighter jets. And in Georgia, one thing that happens is when the men get together for dinner, you have a tamada, a toastmaster, and people begin to make toast. And there's a certain way you make toast, but toast can go on and on and on. One person will start a toast, another person will pick it up, and another person. I've been at dinners where toast have gone on for an hour and a half, maybe longer. In the case of Dr. Pantico Tordia, who was the director of the aircraft facility, Basha, there was a toast in which they talked about one of the decisions he made. In all the aircraft facilities, they installed NCR machinery to automate some of the processes. Nobody could get it to work. Tordia offered $15 bonus to the employees if they could get it working within 30 days. And it succeeded. And consequently, every other plant installed it as well. But I learned through the toast that had they not been successful, Tordia would have been executed for making that decision. There's a reason in central planning why people don't want to tell people they made a mistake. I think back in COVID, we know that it came out of the Chinese lab. If that was an American lab, somebody would have said there's a problem and they would have dealt with it soon. Not in China, not in a centrally planned place. In the United States, we do things. You start a company, you look at the demand, and you look at what's selling. And if you overbuild, you slow things down. Not in China. They overbuilt. Steel factories, they overbuilt. Aluminum plants, they overbuilt. Solar, they overbuilt. Wind, they tend to overbuild. Even electric vehicles. BYD is not only overbuilt, but it's losing money. They don't care about losing money. The government continues to pump money in and subsidizing. That's a disadvantage the Chinese have that Americans doesn't. We don't have. The fact is, we are living in a golden age of manufacturing, and the opportunities are just beginning. The opportunities for investment are just beginning. And the proof of that, if I look at what we're doing at Adams Financial Concepts for our clients and where we are, I can show you where we are. If you look at our returns, we're beating the S&P 500. We don't have any of the Magnificent Seven, but the average or most of the client accounts have two manufacturing. Most client accounts have 10 stocks. The equity side, 10 stocks. Of that, two of those are in manufacturing. We have 10 companies, two manufacturers. One company has been in the portfolios for 8 years. It's grown eightfold, eightfold. 10,000 investor would be worth 80,000, 100,000, 800,000. And one company has been in 7 years. It's grown sevenfold, and it's probably going to come out of the portfolios in the next 18 months to 2 years because it's reached the point where the potential return is going to be equal to the potential risk. The fact is, manufacturing, those companies are taking advantage of large opportunities. They were small, taking advantage of large opportunities and productivity. It works. It's not something I just say. We're living in a golden age of manufacturing. And yeah, one company will come out. I don't know if there'll be another manufacturing company or a service company or what will go in, but I would guess over the next 5 years, there'll be at least one or two or three more manufacturing companies that we see. And one of those companies, which has been in the portfolios for 8 years, grown 8 times over, could easily grow another 8 to 10 times. Would not surprise me to see the stock price increase 100-fold. That's where we are because we see manufacturing as being a golden age and a golden opportunity. And that's where we are. We don't have the Magnificent Seven. The returns would have been better maybe if they would have been, but they didn't fit the criteria. What we are looking for is specific criteria, and we want to see our clients do very well. You can see they are doing well. This is what our clients have done since 2009. Counts 500,000, it's grown to 7.4 million. Not a bad return. There's not very many people that can claim that. And manufacturing has a significant portion of that. And with that, let me open it up for questions. Any questions or comments that you have?
Hey everybody, it's Chris Prouty. I am back and I am here monitoring the webinar chat and the Q&A, and now is the right time to ask questions on anything that Mike has talked about today. So while I'm waiting for you to put in your questions into the chat, I've just included two links for you. The first link is where you can email Mike if you want to email him directly with questions that you might have that you don't want to ask here. You can certainly do so. I have on good authority he reads and responds to every email that he gets. And then also our YouTube channel, About Money Radio, is where we place these episodes every single week. I edit them down, I put them up there for you. And so you can go to that link, which will bring you to YouTube, directly to the YouTube channel. And that is where you can first check out some of our previous broadcasts. But also, if you find value in the content that we create, you can give us a little subscribe. I would love to see when we can help other people, and it means the world. It means the world to us when you do subscribe. So, with that, Mike, I'm just waiting for questions to be asked, and I know sometimes it takes a moment for people to type them in. Mike, somebody asks, what are the top key indicators that we should be looking for at different stages in our investment journeys? And then they specifically say in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond.
For me, I've talked about what we do. We're looking for stocks that have twice the upside potential as downside risk. And we're not talking about buying something at 40 that could go to 42 or down to 39. We're talking about things that have significant upside potential. I said before we started this presentation, taking information from the book Bold, that said we're looking for things that can start small and grow big. That's in manufacturing, That's in service industries, that's in software, that's in healthcare. Uh, I'm a bottoms up approach type person. I'm a fundamental. I'm not looking at the technical analysis. I'm not looking at prices and volumes. I do look at price because I want to buy things cheap, but
Hmm.
um, it's finding things that are starting small that can grow big.
Mike, somebody's asking if you can talk about tariffs and trade policy in with some depth and about how they might change this.
So tariffs are essentially a sales tax. Um, we're going to talk about that next week.
Mm,
Uh, Essentially, it's just like a sales tax. It's been added to the price of the products you're buying. It's regressive um, because it adds to food from outside the US. It adds to products, cars, to solar, to whatever might be, um, steel,
hmm
wood, aluminum, all those things that are being imported into the US. Um, Simply adds to the price. 96% of tariffs are being added, and the consumers are paying 96% of the tariffs. It's not the other countries that are paying for it. It's not the companies that are eating it. They're simply raising the prices in equal amount of the tariffs.
hmm Mike, the next question, aside from the obvious, which American companies can actually compete with what's going on in China?
Uh, yeah, I think I'm going to leave that one alone.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that's where you do the due diligence and the work where you look at what companies are producing and what the American advantage is. And you have to do a complete analysis of the company, the products they're producing, and see if they have a competitive edge. If they don't have a competitive edge, they're not going to make it.
hmm Mike, how long will this golden age last before the next disruption?
I think it's going to continue for a long time.
Hmm.
It's going to be like agriculture asking the question, how long are we going to need food? Um, I mean, taking back to the example that I used in the presentation about the American standard, we're going to continue to need toilets. We're going to continue to need baths and shower stalls. That's going to continue on. It's just a process that it's going to take fewer and fewer and fewer people to produce the same
Yeah.
products.
Yeah.
So the golden age, uh, it's going to be more competitive. It's going to be competitive worldwide, and America's had the advantage of having superior technology. Um, we're going to be on the edge, probably, of looking for things that are more novel, that are things that we can produce that can't be easily duplicated somewhere else. Um, and we're going to find plenty of those. But it's going to be it's going to be fewer and fewer labor hours to produce the same amount of quantity.
hmm Mike, I have a question and I'll invite anybody else. That's all the questions I have in the chat. If anybody does have a question, now is a great time to pop it in. You could actually raise your hand for me so that I can see, so that I can see that you are typing in a question. But Mike, I have a question. What's coming up next week?
Next week, um, tariffs, of course, figured into it, but there's going to be tax twists that can put clients' retirement plans at risk.
Mm, wow.
Things that are coming along, things that are being talked about in terms in Congress, things that you probably don't read about, but that are being discussed that could put retirement plans at risk.
Oh, sounds captivating to me, Mike. Mike, that's all I see for questions in the chat. Everyone, I will remind you, I put a couple of links in the chat. One is Mike's direct email address that goes right to his inbox. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And also, I put in a link to the YouTube channel where you can go and watch this and previous episodes. And you can also subscribe to that channel so that you get alerts when we do create new content before anyone else. Mike, with that, there are no other questions remaining in the chat, so I'm going to hand it over to you to bring us home.
Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for hearing about manufacturing. We do, for our clients, really focus on returns and getting very good returns for our clients. You've seen it, 500,000 to 7.4 million from 2009 to 2020, the beginning or the end of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
If that sounds something good to you, send me an email. We'll talk about it and see if what we do works for you. Can you imagine your portfolio is growing from 500,000 to 7.4 million? Is it for you? Anyway, with that said, thanks for being here. I'll be back next week to talk about retirement plans and things that could be happening that could really reduce and ruin some of your retirement plans. Anyway, that's coming next week. Have a good week until then, and join me next week. I think you'll find it interesting. With that, goodbye.